Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and welcome to Mondays with Mr. Happy, aka Mr. Happy Mondays, the weekly Q&A show where you ask me questions and I answer them. And I am exhausted, so I'll see how I do getting through this. But update, as if my troubles couldn't be ending enough as it is. So Ivy had a dental appointment on Monday. She had to have some work done. And she has not really been eating or drinking much since then. I've had to go to the vet a couple times just to give her fluids. And she's going to be starting some syringe feeding today, pretty much after this video is done. And that has been a very high amount of stress because after what just happened with Aloha, I brought him into the vet for a dental appointment. He didn't even get work done. They just found his heart murmur. And then eventually the brain condition that took his life happened a couple months later. But now Ivy, who's only 4.5 years old, is not eating or drinking. Otherwise acting normal, but not getting the nutrients she needs, probably because of discomfort and pain, largely from the antibiotics that she was given. I think more than the actual thing itself, unless maybe the pain was just like delayed past when she initially had it. But I have been a disaster this last week. The fact that I've managed to push anything out at all with the live letter and everything is nothing short of a miracle. And I'm really hoping that comes to an end soon, because if it doesn't, I don't know that I can even really commit the hours to doing Ultimate when this is dominating so much of my time and psyche. So Ivy's chilling under the bed right now. When she comes out, I've got a food syringe for her. So I'll put her up here and I'll just give her a bit of calories and see how she responds to that. But what a day what a week it's been. Today, not so bad. But, you know, the last week, in fact, I just came in from the pet store to get the supplies to like try to get things that she might eat or might help, like probiotics and high calorie syringes and stuff like that. So update next week, but you know, we'll see how that works out. But for now, I want to get through the Q&A. Thanks to the sponsors on Patreon. Nobody has to support. All my content's free, but to anyone who is supporting over there, thank you very much. Now, since I'm exhausted, let's just get into the Q&A, shall we? Hashtag Mr. Happy Mondays. Howdy, Haps. Howdy. 2 questions. One, I'm at 80 totems for both of the extremes. When will we be able to purchase the mounts? The mounts are always purchasable 2 major patches later. Now, obviously, towards the end of the expansion, that changes, where, you know, 7.4, there is no 7.6. So the 7.4 mount is normally 7.55, and the 7.5 mount is usually 7.58. But 7.0 would be 7.2, 0.1.3, 0.2.4, 0.3.5, and then what I just said. So not until March-ish will you expect it, late March. And 2, how do you store your relic weapons? You don't. You can only store the replicas. The big problem with storing the actual relics is the custom stats. Technically, the armoire would destroy the custom stats if you could store them, so it just doesn't allow you to do it at all. Only the replicas can actually be stored. Hashtag Mr. Happy Mondays. Hey, Happy. Hi. In last week's Q&A, there was a discussion of Phys range utility and the frustration of why even bother bringing one. While I think the best solution is to just bring their damage more in line with high DPS casters and melee, I can see Square being stubborn about that. Age Veilguard, they fixed the problem with fight design, focusing on mechanics that need more movement or more prevalent interrupts. Perhaps tethers that can't be soaked by a tank or near the party, or mechanics that hit the furthest player. So we have plenty of that. You can't lean so heavily into those that the Phys range disproportionately have more mechanics to do than everybody else. So what we saw in the olden days is mechanics were often default given to Phys range strictly because of their movement. And what you would often have happen is melee's doing next to nothing. They would basically be the I'm doing damage, don't make me do anything else roll. Now they still kind of play like that's the case a lot of the time, but that becomes the problem with leaning too heavily into one. It's not even about the mechanics becoming too complex, but you're right about putting too much pressure on one roll. Yeah, it just ends up by default being given to them for that reason. Nowadays, though, we more often give mechanics like that to tanks because tanks can often completely negate those types of mechanics or just effectively remove everyone else's ability to do it, which becomes a whole different discussion as a whole. So yeah, there's a handful of problems with that, but no, I think it needs to come down to job balancing, and then you don't need to design fights around the idea that Phys range suck. Hashtag Mr. Happy Mondays. Hey, Mr. Happy. Hi. Thank you for doing these, and I wish you a great week. Thank you, and you too. Recently, there was the discussion about content pacing, but not a lot of talk about the amount of content. After watching the latest live letter, out of curiosity, I went to check the patch 6.1 site, and I noticed how much more content that patch had. There's almost a direct comparison for more content. The whole CC and PvP update versus skill and 2 map adjustments. All of Realm Reborn and Trust updates versus Halatali and New Hall of the Novice. Tataru and Omega Quest versus Pandemonium Quest, New Housing District versus Walls, etc. Even with the remix of Cloud of Darkness, the patch feels much smaller in scope. Wanted to ask if you feel the same about the amount of content. I don't consider a lot of that content as a whole. And a lot of that stuff isn't regularly timed. So a great example, 6.1 was effectively the entire PvP rework. They're not going to do that again for this. They've already built it. Now they just need to build on top of it. A new housing district, I mean, we saw what happened the last time they added that there was a whole big thing. But people always want more housing related stuff. And right now their efforts aren't in adding more houses, it's in adding more functionality to housing. Being able to change the size of the interiors is something they're working on. Adding more slots on the outer end of housing matters more. And so those take priority over adding something new. All of Realm Reborn dungeons and trust updates versus Halatali, I mean, again, just not a high priority thing for them to be doing, adding trusts to optional dungeons. That's deliberately smaller in scope, so they don't have to put resources into that. Tataru and Omega Quest versus Pandemonium, yeah, but that's also, again, and again, though, I know Hildebrand was also there too, but those are one-off experiences. The Omega Quest was great. It was also 4 years after the fact. Tataru Quest was also kind of like an Endwalker specific thing. I didn't even expect us to get a Pandemonium Quest. So a lot of these things don't really add up to much of anything at all. They were not reasons to really be very excited in Endwalker. Like, they were cool. Like, oh yeah, I'll do the Tataru Quest 15 minutes later. Okay. I'll do the Omega Quest, 30 minutes later. I'm done. That'll be the same with the Pandemonium Quest. I got obviously content out of the Realm Reborn update, and the new Hall of the Novice is honestly more important than getting trusts in older dungeons. So it's all about quantification of what these things actually do versus what needs to happen. Like, again, we don't need a full PvP rework. We don't need a massive amount of new maps. In fact, I'd argue we really don't need much in the way of Crystalline Conflict maps at all. If anything, we need Frontline, Rival Wings, let's bring Astrologos back. Those are where the efforts need to be made. But those do actually factor in a little bit to the content pacing discussion, because I mentioned that a new PvP map earlier in the expansion would breathe a little bit more life into PvP as a whole, something they did in Heavensward when Gordius Savage and Seal Rock released at the same time. But I also mentioned it doesn't have to be that, but PvP could definitely use love earlier in the expansion. So it's just a matter of where a lot of things land on any given patch, but given Endwalker's kind of propensity for one and done versus the effort in stuff like Chaotic, which is not meant to be one and done, and in fact gone above and beyond to try to incentivize it over the long term, both in the item level, in the increased rewards with a brand new reward structure, which could lead to a much better reward system for even the 8-man raids in the future. I think you can't compare apples to oranges. I think it's about the impact either one of these has on the game. Ones that are for people who are doing Dawntrail versus things that are for new players. Endwalker spent a ton of resources working on stuff to help for new players, and we're just spending less resources on those things here. Endwalker had a ton of resources to revamping PvP and getting it populated again. Now they've already done that groundwork. They don't need to do that again. So it just depends on where your individual values are and what you see as content that will engage you. Hashtag Mondays with Mr. Happy. Lollyho, hello. 2 questions this week. 1, what is a small detail you really enjoy? I really like how in Ultimates after the first phase, the music is always synced to the same point, which I do use for mechanics. Death of the Heavens and DSR is a really good example of that. Yeah, another good example is in Top, the blasts in phase 4 when, you're trying to beat the DPS check for blue screen. The blasts line up with some of the note drops from the song. A small detail I really like, honestly, a really small detail that has really no bearing on the game or its state is Omega and Alpha being found all over the world. That's something the devs don't need to do. They never need to expand upon it, even after they did it initially, but they have from time to time. I would like to see them continue to do so. I don't think they're anywhere in Dawntrail, but I also haven't been looking. But I would like to see them continue to do those little things that make your quest progression feel like it's actually progressed the state of the world. And 2, if skill spell speed was an actual viable build, what jobs do you think would be really fun to go fast with? I mean, Samurai and Black Mage are proof going fast can be a lot of fun. I like Speed Monk, believe it or not. I did 1.6 GCD Monk in Bozia. I loved it. Ninja wouldn't be any more fun. Machinist wouldn't be any more fun. Bard, it wouldn't be any worse, but I don't think it would be more fun. Not as long as most of its mechanics are on the global tick, you know, with dealing with the song every 30 seconds. It loses a lot of that. Dancer, definitely not. Summoner, it desyncs. If it didn't desync, then it would probably be at least a little more fun, but not really that much more fun. Picto, I think, would be. I think in the similar vein to Black Mage, being spell speed and being able to draw everything faster and do more. It wouldn't really work great with the way it is now, but in theory, the play style, it would be fun. Tanks, not really. Healers, not really, I don't think. I don't think a lot of the jobs would actually be more fun with skill and spell speed were more viable. But I would still like them to be not so rigid in design. It's like, oh, if you don't have exactly this GCD, then you'll hate your life. That's the part about them I don't like. Less about them making more builds viable and more about how if they're incorrect, it feels terrible. Hashtag Mr. Happy Mondays. Hey, Mr. Happy. Hi. Hope all is well with you and yours. An extra hello for any miss. Thank you and hello back. As a tank, I always ask the healer if they are good with big pulls before I go wall to wall, but notice I'm the only one anymore. Why is it people have moved away from asking a simple question? Just because it's so widespread. It's very rare that you run into the person who's not okay with it, an expert, because it is such a standard thing. So most people don't bother asking anymore. Now I say most people don't bother asking. That doesn't mean that they shouldn't be. Wiped to getting used to Astro is a low-level dungeon. If it's a low-level dungeon, I would not wall-to-wall. That is, I feel like anyone who does that is asking for trouble, because a lot of the low-level dungeons don't have off globals. We don't necessarily have our oh shit buttons. Like what if it's a really low level? You don't have benediction, or you don't have hallowed ground, or you don't have nearly as many cooldowns, or there's so many things that can be missing that even though those dungeons are easier, it doesn't necessarily mean that doing those big pulls are always the same difficulty. Yeah, so that's a problem with an individual player, because people who are doing that do it in high-level dungeons, and players who understand how the game actually works and plays at all levels and understands the skill levels of the duty finder and like how to assess that, they don't do that. So that's actually, if you see someone doing wall-to-walls in low-level dungeons, it is generally them being the less skilled player. Just because they've done it before, there's a good chance they just did it with a really good player who managed to make it work, but that it is an otherwise not advisable thing. I've done that. I've done like wall-to-walls in like really low-level dungeons, but that's with my stream. I'll be like, yo, let's do it. Let's go for the wall-to-wall. I know we got like no buttons, but we got double Phys range or you know, Phys range caster, so our AoE is insane at this level. So let's just go. Like, I'll have a reason for trying, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Or if we killed like half the pull and then died somehow, I'll be like, all right, well, we killed half the pull, so now we can do the rest of it wall-to-wall. So yeah, that's definitely an issue of that individual, and that individual is the problem, not the party around them. Hashtag Mondays with Mr. Happy. Hello, hello, hi, and potential hello for anyone else who might have missed one. None so far. Looking for some ideas on some different games to try, so I have a couple of quick questions for you that exude, and both of these exude 14 in some way, shape, and form. From a story perspective, what's the best game you've played in your opinion? I can't. Best game ever? Well, A, I wouldn't have answered Final Fantasy 14, but B, I mean, best from a story, I don't know. That's like a really individual question. I'd have to assess every game I've ever played to answer that question. I don't have an answer for that. I can just tell you that recently Metaphor had a good story, so I'll say that. From a mechanical gameplay perspective, what's the hardest game you've played? I mean, Devil May Cry. By far, Devil May Cry. In terms of like a game that's equally as mechanical and challenging without being like a Superman 64, which by the way, I have beaten, style problem. Devil May Cry, if you're willing to play up to the higher difficulties, like I am used to doing, easily Devil May Cry. Hashtag Mr. Happy Mondays. Oh, no, I see the hello. I was about to say, but then I looked back and I saw the hello, by the way, I didn't forget. Thoughts on giving Bard, Machinist, and even Dancer cast bars again? Smile. Well, obviously a troll question to some capacity, but also a genuine curiosity. No. I think you can make it work if you had old Machinist, but Bard and Dancer, no. And some people might point to PvP, the slow movement. I don't want the slow movement. I actually hate the slow movement that Bard and Machinist get in PvP. I don't like that. I'd rather do less damage and be able to move freely, or have to commit to standing still than do something that's somewhat in between. Because your movement patterns in PvE become incredibly strange when you have to start factoring that in to movement. And the mechanics often aren't built with that in mind. So no. Hashtag Mr. Happy Mondays. Lolly ho. Hello. Do you think we'll see Galka character models? What Final Fantasy 11 Galka characters are important enough to be included? Did you watch the trailer? If you actually, this is 3 days ago, so this might have actually been before the trailer, because it's Sunday. So yeah, you would. The trailer wasn't out. The Archangels are there. Every character model is going to be like, we've already seen that they have Taro and Elvan. I don't think we saw the other ones. I'd have to go back and watch. But I mean, they're going to keep their original models. So Galka is an obvious one. Maybe Shadow Lord becoming Ralgrim again, and Zaid. Like, those are the only three I would realistically expect to see. There's no reason for them to include anyone except Ralgrim, Zaid, and the one we already know, which is Archangel Galka. Hashtag Mr. Happy Mondays. Hi there, Mr. Happy. Hi. 2 questions for you. Cool. I want to try my first blind extreme of 7.1 and was curious how long it takes the pros to figure things out. So I have a rough idea of what to expect one team member to look up a guide, even though we agreed to go blind. So I'll be honest with you, the pros do it in usually less than an hour. Maybe a little more than an hour, depending on the extreme, if it's got something like really weird, but like, yeah, 60 to 90 minutes, I guess is what I'll say is the average for a pro group to at least figure it all out. Doesn't necessarily mean that group of people will execute it properly in that time. More often than not, you know, the skill level you're referring to, that is the case, but it takes 8 people to do that. So sometimes someone's a little bit slower, especially at 2 in the morning. But yeah, 60 to 90 minutes. And 2, with the new glossary of mechanics, do you think the community will refer to these mechanics by their glossary names or by the names the community has given them? The community names will always win out. However, they did say they were looking to include certain community names. So like, I wouldn't be surprised, for example, to see donuts called donuts. You know, like some people call them dynamos. That's not going to happen. But donut AoE is a good term for that. And I don't expect to hear point blanks called chariots, but you know, some people may still refer to them as chariots, and some people will understand what people say when they are referring to a chariot. So it'll be a mix, but they're trying to incorporate some of those terms into the glossary itself. So I think there will be enough overlap where there's not going to be much concern. Hashtag Mr. Happy Mondays. Hey, Happy. Hi. Hope you're as hype as I am for the 11 themed raid. Yeah, I mean, I'm curious to see how it'll do. I was thinking, since the Dragon's area could technically be somewhat of a road to Sky, that Fafnir could be more of a mini boss to Proto Ultimate. No, he's going to be the boss. They wouldn't, essentially they've shown us the first boss and the final boss. There's no other boss to hide. Like, if you are earning in a drop that Shadow Lord is your final boss for the first raid, they've shown us all the bosses. And more than likely, what's weird enough, the order they showed them is up for debate if they do that order. Because in the trailer, they show Prish, then the Archangels, then Fafnir/Nidhogg, then Shadow Lord. If they go by that order, then you would fight the Archangels before Fafnir, even. Now, the fact that the Archangels are being fought before Shadow Lord, obviously, for a lot of people, is like, what the hell? So that's clearly not the relevant bit. It's a fan servicey bit, but we'll see how. We got to get the explanation for what the walk, if this is like the Walk of Echoes, and that's what they're going with here. So curious to see what they'll do. But no, they've shown us all 4 bosses. Hashtag Mr. Happy Mondays. Hey, Haps. Hello. Long-time watcher, first-time asker, so I got to thank you for being the reason I got into 14 and Final Fantasy games subsequently. You're welcome. Glad you're enjoying. With the recent release of 16 on PC, I found myself really enjoying it, but wondering if you plan on recording a story review with both the base game and DLC. Probably not. I think I've spoken on them individually in separate videos, at the very least in whatever I uploaded on... yeah, whatever I uploaded on YouTube at the time. But no, I don't think I plan on doing that anytime soon. I did overall enjoy it, though. I'm definitely on the side of big fan of 16. It helps that I'm already a big fan of the gameplay style from other games, Devil May Cry, that have similar-ish gameplay styles. And so it worked out for me. So that's it. And the story, for the most part, worked for me, too. A few bits in there that, you know, I don't like that the DLC had to fill in the gaps, but if I'm objectively looking at the package without factoring that in, then it looks a lot better. Hashtag Mr. Happy Mondays. Hi, Mr. Happy. Hi. Hope you're doing okay. I'm doing, is what I like to say. Recently revisited the Monster Hunter raid and liked how enemy attacks will knock the player back and lock them into a stun animation for a short time. I always thought that particular penalty for not paying attention added a weighty dynamic that a simple vuln stack and some damage can't provide. I think this type of mechanic interaction has a place in more content without it feeling out of place. A fight has to be built for it. Much like that fight, the fight needs to be built for it. Because like we've had, a great example would be Ultros and Typhon, where if you get knocked out of the arena, you're not dead and out of the fight, but you're not allowed to move for a short period of time. And if all 8 players are out of the fight at the same time, then that results in the fight resetting. So it does work when you design the fight around it, but as a default, not unless there's a significant risk of you dying to the next attack anyway. At which point it kind of defeats the purpose. It just draws out your death and makes your recovery that much more delayed, thus having that much more impact on the fight. If anything, it would be even worse. As opposed to an alternative, it would more than because otherwise a knockback and a stun is just flavor. But if you're at risk of dying from the stun right after, that creates a whole nother dynamic that increases the level of punishment sometimes, and other times doesn't. That's what I mean. Like, it only works for Rathalos because much like in Monster Hunter itself, if you get knocked back and stunned, but you're playing with other people and it like goes for, I mean, even if it just goes for your Palico or it goes for one of the other people you're playing with, they use a luring pod, whatever, then, you know, you're like, oh, thank God. But if it goes for you again and you don't have anything that prevents dizzy, you're dead. And or at least you're more than likely gonna die. I've been stunned into the Nergigante charge before in World, and I'm dead. What else am I gonna say? I'm just dead from that. Plenty of situations like that with bosses like Magnum Aloe and Valstrax and Rise. So yeah, it only works when you make the fight work, make it work. So they could revisit it, but I don't want it. It shouldn't be something they just generically do. Hashtag Mondays with Mr. Happy. Hey, Haps. Hope all is well. All is. I've been playing a bunch of melee jobs lately and started wondering if there was some way to differentiate them in other ways than rotations with pure damage numbers. Something like maiming having increased melee range with a Dragoon Spear or Reaper Scythe, or scouting having a higher base movement. Well, to be fair, Ninja has a higher base movement, just not scouting. If any thoughts? I mean, it is a way, but you run different kinds of risks. That's why I always say the biggest thing to do is to create separate paths to power, which you're referring to rotation. But the ways in which they get to their most powerful points is oftentimes the more important thing. If you can absolutely give Dragoons and Reapers, for example, more range, but do you then have to design every boss around the idea of that range existing? And then when you don't have that range, do you feel worse? Or then when you have that range, do you even notice it because you still have to treat the mechanic the exact same way? Like it creates those types of things. In theory, the 2 specific examples you gave, increased range and movement speed, result in a net similarity DPS. Because even though you don't have as much of a range as, let's say, Ninja and Viper, for your example, you can get out and back in faster, again, in theory. Whereas a Dragoon can start further out and doesn't have to move as far. Well, who would I rather be in that situation? Honestly, the Dragoon and the Reaper. And then for striking, you would need a whole nother thing. And then for tank, like, you can't just do it for a couple of jobs. You have to do it for, I mean, obviously, I know you're talking about melees, but there needs to be some other check and balance in place that keeps these things balanced. Otherwise, this just becomes something that gets adjusted and buffed and nerfed repeatedly, or they buff another job to the point where you barely even notice the difference because designing around it creates a different set of pros and cons, or at least can create a different set of pros and cons. So it's one of those ideas you can't write off, but you have to, you can't just say, oh, they could just do that, right? Because if they could just do it, they would. And if they could just do it, is it actually creating impact? So those are questions that also need to be considered and answered subsequently. Hashtag Mondays with Mr. Happy. Sup, Haps. Sup. Do you think a min item level clear of Coils is possible? Yes. A few times I've fought Tuntani with minimum item level. It appears practically impossible to beat because of how much stuff we don't have. How much stuff you don't have doesn't really play that much relevance into that. It does make certain things tougher, having not as many tank cooldowns, for example. You gotta remember that we used to swap just for tank cooldowns back in the day. Like, we didn't swap because we had to all the time. Sometimes we just swapped because the main tank was out of cooldowns. That was just something you had to consider. And then you also just had to be extra safe. Like, we've gotten so used to relying on our off-global tools now that when we come into situations like that, people pretend like they still have those skills when they're at lower levels. Like going back to the mass pulling question we had earlier in low level dungeons, same thing happens in this particular case. And that's the thing that players who go back and do the low item level stuff struggle with. Not only can you do minimum item level, there are people who do level 50 and take off like almost all of their gear. Like they don't just do, like I do low item level. I do it where it's like we stay max level to keep all of our tools, but we bring our item levels down. That's what we've been doing to prep for Ultimate. But people do min item level and then still take gear off and get through it. So absolutely yes. Hashtag Mr. Happy Mondays. Hey, Hap. Hi. Maybe the strangest question this week. Did you read all the other ones before asking this? This was 6 days ago. How could this be the strangest one? I was wondering, due to your good hairline, if you have a hair routine. My hair routine is I wash my hair. That's it. And I don't even consider my hairline like, I mean, I don't even consider it at all. I don't think about it. I have hair. That's it. No, I go to Whole Foods and buy the 365 brand mass thing of shampoo and conditioner, and that's the end of it. Nothing special. Hashtag Mr. Happy Mondays. Hello, hello, hello. In your opinion, what roles are the most and least played in the Party Finder? Least played healer, most played Phys ranged. Buddy of mine, I have very different opinions, but we also do our reclears different times of the week. Yeah, most played is either going to be Phys ranged or melee. And least played is definitely going to be healer. I don't think that's even up for debate. I think most played is very anecdotal because you might like find every group is filled with casters and every group is filled with melee. The DPS role almost always fills first, and it's very rare that the Phys range is the very last thing to join. So that's the way I'm judging it. But yeah, the DPS side is anecdotal, but at the very least, fastest DPS, slowest healer. Like at least if I want to narrow it down to the 3 actual roles and not the sub roles within DPS or healer or tank, then yeah, those would be my answers. Hashtag Mondays with Mr. Happy, aka Mr. Happy Mondays, a weekly Q&A show where you ask me a question and I answer them. Hey, that's my line. Hi, good day to you, sir, and salutations. Hello. Wondering if you had the chance to play Veilguard. I'm not going to be playing Veilguard. I think didn't I mention last week in the Q&A that you asked this in that I wasn't going to be playing it? I never thought it looked good. Like from the moment it was unveiled, I was like, I'm not hooked on it. But it's not even all that. If nothing else had released or was releasing around this time, yeah, I actually probably would have picked it up. Mario and Luigi Brotherhood is soon. I'm going to be trying Brighter Shores. I 100%ed Metaphor. I did Romancing Saga 2. There's a patch coming out. It's a disaster. And then also, like, if I really wanted to get into it, there's also, like, East X and a number of other things. It would have had to have released around a time where nothing else was releasing that I was interested in for me to have considered it. And this is the last question, actually. Hashtag Mondays with Mr. Happy. Hola. Hola. How you doing? I'm doing it. How's the cat? Ugh. Yeah, we'll say bad. How'd you know? I've got 2, actually, you probably have watched my streams over the week. Got 2 speculation questions. Not big on speculation, but hey, it's the last question. Let's get into it. What if seeing as the Oracle of Light and Dark phase is not the final phase? The final phase is them going all in on the Ultimecia inspiration. I mean, it's possible. We don't have a Griever equivalent. I know we have Dad Cred, but I don't want to see that Griever abomination necessarily. And that's a large part of the final bits of Ultimecia is that. They could take another stance on it, but I mean, yeah, sure. They could. You're right. The Oracle of Light and Dark thing might not be the last phase. It might still be the last phase. We don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. 2, what if they did another DSR type thing where after E12S phase 2 Gaia dies, sending you back? See, this was asked before we saw the live letter. I mean, again, I would have been like, okay, yeah. Like, that's the thing with speculation. Like, what am I going to tell you? No, they would never do. Like, how am I going to answer? Like, yeah, absolutely, or no, they would never. Like, I could never answer that. We know what the story is now. We know that Reen, when she's becoming Shiva, gets taken over by Mitron and effectively turned against the Warrior of Light. He then immediately turns Reen's memories into Dad Cred, and Dad Cred is where it starts. So there's no reason to rewind. I was originally thinking that we would play through certain bits of Gaia's memories and have to fix them, similar to what happens in E12 Phase 1, but more in line with what happens within Eden itself. And that could still technically happen. But now it mostly looks like they just shoehorned Reen into being our opponent on top of everything else, which I'm not 100% sure if they're gonna how happy the resolution to this is gonna be. In Savage, which by the way canonically is Mitron's kind of warped, I don't want to call it a memory, it's his warped perspective of how things were gonna go effectively, or how they went. I'd have to read the quest dialogue again, but it's not a wandering minstrel situation. It's literally a piece of Eden filled with Mitron's essence and memories. And in that, we kill Gaia. Gaia doesn't make it out alive at the end of E12S Phase 2. It's just that that's not canonically what even happens, because, you know, the normal mode story is what actually happens. So are we trying, the question becomes, are we trying to give that a positive resolution? Or is this the worst case scenario of everything that could happen, which is how DSR went? DSR's alternative was Hoshfont lives, but 2 dragons die, like Age Veilguard and Nidhogg both die after their eyes are taken and absorbed by Thornton. And we probably lose a handful of other lives. I mean, the dragons get essentially the dragons just get massacred as a result of, you know, Hoshfont living and us not getting to Azazla in time, which is, you know, that's a bad ending. That's not a good ending, what happened there. So that's the question of what they'll do. Does this have a positive resolution? Does it have a negative resolution? And that's really where the speculation needs to, I think it needs to kind of lean towards. But anyway, that's the last question in the Q&A for this week. I think there were a couple of others, but like I don't know, I didn't want to answer them. So I've scrolled past them already. But yeah, thanks for asking questions for this week's Q&A. Be sure to ask in the comment section of the video below. Be sure to like and subscribe. Thanks again to the sponsors over on Patreon for supporting. And I'm going to go see if Ivy will come out from under the bed so I could try to give her her food syringe. Because I really need to get her some calories, and I need her to cooperate with that. But anyway, I will see all of you in the next one. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, take care.